This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop. Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, you know, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
Welcome to it, my friends. It's Tuesday here on the Steve Gruber Show. This part of the program brought to you by Consumers Mutual Insurance. Find out more at consumersmutual.org. It's the insurance company I chose for myself and my family. The phone number here is 888-900-9966 if you'd like to join the conversation at any time. The death of the First Amendment. A lot of conversations are held over the Second Amendment, but the death of the First Amendment is something I've focused on here from time to time and something that should concern you more. This whole notion of you have the right to never be offended, this whole notion of hate speech, this whole notion of categorizing different types of comments, the idea that you should be silenced if you don't buy into the notion that you're driving a car to work is creating global warming. You know, it's settled science, nothing to discuss here. In effect, outlawing such things. Well, the University of California may explicitly recognize the right of students to not be offended, not now and not ever, if a resolution under consideration is approved by the Board of Regents next week. The resolution, publicized by UCLA law professor Eugene Volokh at the Washington Post, reads in part as follows. Intolerance has no place at the University of California. We define intolerance as unwelcome conduct motivated by discrimination against or hatred toward other individuals or groups. It may take the form of acts of violence or intimidation, threats, harassment, hate speech, derogatory language reflecting stereotypes or prejudice, or inflammatory or derogatory use of culturally recognized symbols of hate, prejudice, or discrimination. Everyone in the university community has the right to study, teach, conduct research, and work free from acts of expressions of intolerance. The university will respond promptly and effectively to reports of intolerant behavior and treat them as opportunities to reinforce the university's principles against intolerance. And it goes on and on and on, more of the same gobbledygook. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of some of the things that that will not be allowed. Articulating a view that people with various intellectual disabilities are incapable of various intellectual tasks, or people with various physical disabilities are incapable of various physical tasks, would be condemned by the authority of the university. Can you just see Big Brother staring at you right there? For example, Volokh says, saying that illegal aliens or non-citizens who are legally here ought not to be appointed to be, say, the student member of the Board of Regents would be condemned. Really? Having illegal people that are in the country illegally breaking the law shouldn't be on the Board of Regents. Well, that's hate speech, you see. Attempts to discuss cultural or biological differences between men and women, between gay and straight people, or between different ethnic groups would be condemned totally without any tolerance for speakers to be given any argument. For example, the question over whether gay parents can raise children as effectively in the same manner as straight parents, relevant to the gay marriage debate, would be silenced before there would be any debate, period. The resolution set to be considered in just a couple of days here, September 17th. I think that's Thursday, right? And it has already attracted criticism for what it doesn't include. People are already offended at not being unoffended enough. Just keep up. Several Jewish groups have pushed hard for the revolution. Let me just rephrase that. Several Jewish groups have pushed hard for the resolution Freudian slip. To include the U.S. State Department's definition of anti-Semitism, which holds that denying Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state is anti-Semitic. Such language wasn't included after pro-Palestinian activists said the language would be used to silence them. Any language designed to silence anybody is wrong. The United States Constitution says nowhere that you have the right to never be offended. Tolerate what you want. Speak up against what you don't. This whole notion that somehow you have the right to never be offended is garbage. Is garbage that leads to a very bad place. It leads to tyranny. It leads to tyranny. And this whole notion that on college campuses you have safe rooms, so no one can ever be offended. So no one can ever be offended. You have a safe room. Don't have a thought that might offend anybody. Please, people, wake up. The vigorous exchange of ideas and thoughts and conversation is one of the pillars of America. If you're offended, too damn bad. Move on. If you don't like this radio show, hit the button. If you don't like what you're seeing on TV, grab the remote. If you don't like the book, throw it away. But enough already. Enough already. All right, so let's see this. Here's an interesting editorial from the Detroit News. President Barack Obama has signaled the United States will accept at least 10,000 more refugees from Syria during the next year. According to an editorial in the Detroit News, Michigan should lobby to be the destination for most, if not all, those seeking new homes. Bringing them here makes sense. The state already has one of the largest Syrian immigrant communities in the nation. There are a number of public and private support agencies in place with expertise in dealing with Arab newcomers. In addition, Michigan has an abundance of inexpensive available housing, particularly in Detroit and its other urban centers. Detroit, with up to 80,000 abandoned structures, would benefit from refugees willing to repair and homestead those properties. And a large percentage of those refugees from Syria have the education and skills needed to fill the nearly 100,000 jobs that have gone unfilled because of lack of trained workers. Governor Rick Snyder has set a goal of attracting 50,000 foreign immigrants to Michigan. That objective has been hampered by the slow pace of expanding visas at the federal level. Again, this is an editorial in the Detroit News, just came out today. But the humanitarian crisis in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East is swamping Europe with refugees. More than 9 million Syrians are displaced both inside and outside the country. The United States, which took in only 4,000 Syrians last year, could do more to help, and should. In May, two academics writing in the New York Times said the humanitarian crisis caused by the Syrian civil war and the social crisis in Detroit, rooted in its massive population loss, could be conjoined to produce something positive. David Laitland and Mark Jarr noted the current Metro Detroit population of Syrian immigrants is entrepreneurial. 19% own their own businesses and solidly middle class. Average incomes between $50,000 and $70,000 a year. As their predecessors have proven, they are the type of newcomers who could quickly contribute to the local economy and tax base, filling neighborhoods and schools. You can read the rest of this op-ed piece in the Detroit News today, saying Michigan should lobby for the Syrian refugees. What do you think of that? What do you think of that? Tuesday on the Steve Gruber Show, something for you to chew on. We'll be right back.
Taking a closer look at the stories that affect you most with a big dose of common sense.
This is the end, my only friend, the end.
All right, welcome back to it. It is Tuesday here on the program, and appreciate your support, of course. The phone number, 888-900-9966. If you ever want to become part of the conversation, common sense encouraged, of course. And remember, you do not have the right to not be offended here. That's only at the University of California. Here on the Steve Gruber Show, we will probably offend you on a regular basis. And if you don't like it, well, it's not going to change. Peter Brookes, our next guest, Senior Fellow for National Security Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Peter, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
I hope you're not easily offended, Just want to make sure we're not ruffling any feathers.
Okay.
Give me an idea. China has just sent a message to America. Don't mess with it. The Chinese are creating islands out of the Pacific, sending warships off the coast of Alaska. All sorts of things going on. What is going on with the Chinese, Peter?
Well, China's been involved in a military modernization program for a number of years, and obviously we're very distracted, strategically distracted, I would say, by what's going on, obviously, in the Middle East with the Islamic State. And I wrote a column last week in the Boston Herald talking about that, folks ought to pay attention to this large military parade that the Chinese put on to commemorate the end of World War II. The fact that while President Obama was in Alaska, they sent warships off the coast of Alaska, and that the Chinese are really sending us a message, basically, don't mess with us. And many, number of years ago, the Chinese were not much of a military power. They've been spending double digits on their defense budget for 20 years now, and not only are they a big military, but they're an increasingly capable military because of their own spending, as well as things like economic espionage, cyber espionage, where they're stealing technologies and other things from the United States and other advanced militaries, and they're really quite capable now. Not quite as good as the United States, but they plan to replace the United States as the preeminent power in the Pacific, and it's something we need to pay attention to.
Well, and the way we're going, our Navy is the smallest it's been since before World War I, if I'm not mistaken. So, the last time our Navy got built up was by the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, by a guy by the name of Teddy Roosevelt. That was before he became Vice President, that he really built the Navy up properly, and he built it up to the point that it was still smaller than it's embarrassing where our defenses are, I think, is a safe way to put it.
We also had a significant naval buildup during the Reagan administration, too. No question about that. But, yeah, the numbers are that we're basically looking at that, and, of course, the capabilities are obviously different from a World War I ship. But in terms of numbers, yeah, we're going to have a Navy smaller than we had in World War I. And unfortunately, I think the United States' global interests have increased significantly since World War I. And we have other issues with the other services as well, our Air Force, our Marine Corps, our Army. And we're going to be facing this is going to be a different threat than we're facing like in the Middle East with the Islamic State. This is going to be a large nation state, a country. China has the world's largest population, the second largest economy, the world's largest military in terms of pure numbers. And they're a real contender. And one of the things is they plan to replace the United States as the preeminent power atop the international system. So we have a rival and a challenge.
Well, and here's the thing. There are certain things right now that we are unparalleled in. Boomers, the Trident-class nuclear submarines, USS Michigan, for example, are pretty well, the premier submarine, in my estimation, on the planet. But other things, like the Chinese getting flat tops, getting aircraft carriers, creating these islands, which is, in effect, creating bases in the South Pacific. We have real challenges. There is no question.
Yeah, Steve, you talk about the boomers. The Chinese are developing boomers. They are developing fleet ballistic missile submarines. They have a couple of them now. They plan to put their nuclear deterrent aboard them just like we do. You mentioned their aircraft carriers. It's not quite operational. It's still in its shakeout stages, but they're building 3 more. And that's just what, that information is available publicly. Who knows what else?
They're building a blue water navy.
Yeah, blue water navy. They'll be able to project power. And I'll talk a little bit about these islands. The Chinese basically claim the entirety of the South China Sea. They say this is Chinese sovereign territory. We're talking about 1 million square miles of ocean. And on to advance that, they're basically taking rocky outcrops and coral reefs, and they're doing land reclamation on top of them and building islands, which will be turned into, I believe, military bases for the Chinese so they can exert or assert their sovereignty over that part of the world. Now, the South China Sea, most people probably don't think a lot about it. Probably Vietnam-era veterans remember it quite well. But the fact of the matter is that 40% of the world's commerce, seaborne commerce, goes through the South China Sea, through things like the Malacca Strait into the Indian Ocean. Our aircraft carriers pass through there on their way to the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf. Our ships and submarines pass through there. Commercial ships pass through there. This is a strategic area, and the Chinese have built 7 islands so far, And on one of them, they're building a 3,000-meter airstrip, which is a 10,000-foot runway, basically,
That's
that they can land any of their military aircraft on.
Heavy bombers.
Yeah, heavy bombers, exactly. Anything smaller than that. And they're working on that. I mean, they have obviously a land-based nuclear deterrent. They're sending their nuclear deterrent to sea, and now it's believed that they're going to do the same thing with a bomber force, just like we have and what the Soviets had during the Cold War.
Yeah, there you have it. And you know, I've said, you know, I've thought for my entire life the Chinese were the real threat, not the Russians, even back during the Cold War. I always felt the Chinese. And what do they have, 2 million men in their standing army now? Some incredible number of actual soldiers.
They're actually decreasing it, Steve. Interestingly, during this parade in Tiananmen Square in Beijing recently, let me make two other points. One is that the president of China, Xi Jinping, announced they were decreasing the size of the military by 300,000, and that sounds like a lot because that is a lot. But what they're actually doing is professionalizing their military, like we have. It's not going to be just a bunch of conscripts and political generals. He's making a real military fighting force out of it, so he's downsizing to make it better and more professional. The other thing I want
Peter
to point
Brookes,
out
we have to run, my friend. Peter Brookes, thank you so much from the Heritage Foundation. Great day, great conversation. Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Keeping you in touch with Michigan and the world.
.33 after the hour. It's Tuesday, and I appreciate you dialing it in. You know, we have a lot of conversations about the illegals coming into the country and what it means and how it impacts us as a nation. Well, make no mistake, it impacts some areas more significantly, more acutely than it does other areas. According to many reports now, these illegal alien miners have energized some of the violent United States street gangs like MS13, one of the most violent and ruthless gangs in America today. Chris Farrell, the Director of Research and Investigations for Judicial Watch, joining us on the program. Chris, welcome back.
Great to be on with you again. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. Doing well. So, you know, one of the unintended, consequences, I suppose, or maybe it is an intended consequence. Who would know with the policy we have at the southern border what our intended consequences truly are? But here we are looking at the influx of these illegals that, they speak Spanish. They need to find a place to fit in. They're vulnerable because they're hungry, they're poor, they're desperate. Perfect target for gangs. Am I wrong?
You are correct. It's a recruiting ground. It's a very fertile recruiting ground. And the gangs themselves know how to identify, isolate, recruit, vulnerable, needy, scared people that want to have a sense of identity, that want to belong to something, that want security. And people, when in doubt, you go with what you know. So the guy who looks like you, talks like you, sounds like you, he's friendly, he's safe. And it's a natural, basic human instinct. And the bad guys know precisely how to manipulate that and how to use it as a recruiting tool.
As a result, give me an idea, Chris, of what you think as far as, well, first of all, what are the numbers? Any idea? MS-13 represents how many people?
It's easily going to be in the tens of thousands. I have a surprise kind of fun-filled fact for you. The highest concentration of MS-13 gang members in the United States is Crystal City, Virginia, right across the river from D.C., that little chunk of Virginia that sits basically between Ronald Reagan Airport and the Pentagon. It's got the highest concentration of MS-13 gang members, which is a mind blower because there's any number of federal law enforcement agencies that have their headquarters in that same area.
Why there?
Well, I think Northern Virginia generally is sort of a hub for illegal aliens. I mean, frankly, every city is now a border city. There was a day when border cities were places like El Paso and Tucson and San Diego. Now every city is because of this enormous influx. No one is being deported. No one. And the gates are wide open. And, Border Patrol, they're travel agents. They're busy giving out Greyhound bus tickets and $200 stipends to people that cross the border illegally. So it's a free-for-all, and you see concentrations in cities across the country. It doesn't really matter whether you're in Northern Virginia or Washington State or anyplace else, because the Border Patrol is facilitating moving people into the country. And once they're in the interior, goodbye, good luck. And it'll be very difficult to get any sort of accountability as to who's who and what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm sitting and I'm mining for information. You nice thing about the internet, I suppose. Crystal City, Virginia, but there's not much about it. There's tourist ideas and so forth. But you wouldn't be a tourist in Crystal City, Virginia, based on what you just told me.
No. I mean, it's basically it's a part of it is a bedroom community for D.C. It's a lot of federal workers. That's where they go home to. But there's also a lot of office space and then sort of a light industrial commercial area. But according to Homeland Security and agents that I've spoken to, it is the highest concentration of MS13 gang members. And there's some very well-intentioned but horribly uninformed and sort of naive folks out there. In a little bedroom community of Herndon, Virginia, a while back, we were successful in shutting down a day labor center that the city was sponsoring, considered a misuse of taxpayer dollars to have a city run a day labor center. But in the course of doing that investigation and that litigation, we uncovered the fact that a church group was organizing these day laborers and then giving them boxed lunches. What they didn't realize, though, is that some of the people showing up to their community center to get their free lunch were MS-13 gang members who were using the day labor center to recruit. So you basically had a church group giving boxed lunches to gangbangers. And, again, well-intentioned, kind people, but terribly misguided.
Yeah, and the MS-13 spreads all across. It's heavy, of course, in Mexico, California, Texas. But you're right, its presence in Virginia now is spreading. But it's all across America. In fact, MS-13 is now present in places like Alaska. If you look at the distribution of these gang members. And who would think of, Anchorage, Alaska as being a hotbed for gang activity, but there it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about money. This is a business, right? We sometimes get, we think in, and it's natural and normal, but we think in sort of stereotypical ways. We have one example or one sample, and then we know that sample or example, and we try to compare it to other things to find like items. I mean, that's how the human brain works, right? This is like that,
sure,
and that is like this. But when you strip away sort of the ethnic or racial politics of it, and you look at it as a business, look, they're looking to open new franchises, right? Do you have a particular franchise in your town or not? And they want to grow, and so they spread their business, and that's how it works.
Yeah, and so, franchise. Open a drive-through for MS-13. We're on the line with Chris Farrell, Director of Research and Investigations for Judicial Watch. And one of the results of the massive flood of illegals at the southern border is the expansion of MS-13 and other violent gangs. MS-13, one of the better-known gangs,
Sure.
Pretty much in all 50 states now, into Canada, in places like Ottawa and Quebec, also into parts of Europe now, in Spain and Portugal, according to distribution maps. I mean, this is because they're hooked up with the cartels, the Sinaloa Cartel and others. I mean, they're powered by drugs and drug money.
Precisely.
It's about finance and cash.
They're the distributors. They're the local retail shop for the Sinaloa Cartel and even smaller or lesser-known cartels, whether it's the very, very dangerous Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Those are the guys who have transplanted Afghanis, teaching them two things. One, to increase both the quantity and quality of their poppy production, to keep heroin cheap. And two, more dangerously, they're teaching them how to shoot down Mexican Army helicopters.
Yeah. Chris Farrell, I wish we had more time, Director of Research and Investigations for Judicial Watch. Remember, doing drugs is a victimless crime, right? Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
It's the Steve Gruber Show on a Tuesday. We'll be right back.
Michigan, born and raised with Midwestern values and Michigan common sense.
That's what I said now.
45 after the hour. The destruction of the family can be, in my estimation, traced back to good intentions, at least alleged good intentions, of the 1960s and the war on poverty and so forth. But the war on poverty, in effect, became the war on the family. And the war on the family resulted in more problems with poverty, to me. We're going to sort this conversation out with Robert Rector, Senior Research Fellow at the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society and Domestic Policy Studies. Robert, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
To me, it seems like a vicious cycle, but it seems that to me, and I've had this conversation many times, that the government has incentivized the destruction of the American family. As a result, millions of children born out of wedlock every year into a place where they have fewer opportunities and a lower chance and lower expectations and a less chance to succeed. Am I wrong?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. And actually, most people, scholars on the left, also recognize this, but they're reluctant to raise their voices because it's politically incorrect. But when Lyndon Johnson launched the war on poverty way back in 1965, about 6% of American children were born outside of marriage. Today, that number is 42%. And the women that have children without being married are invariably women with a high school degree or less. Very few college-educated women experience that. And so what's happening in our society is we're actually sort of separating into two separate castes, with kids in the top half of society are being raised by parents with college degrees who are married, and kids in the bottom half increasingly are being raised by single moms with a high school degree or less, the very women who will have by far the hardest time going it alone. And the welfare state is not the only factor here, but it is a big factor. Welfare came in and basically almost deliberately said, you know, you don't really need this low-income dad. We'll give you an income that will help you support the child without being married. And then all of the welfare programs, whether it's food stamps or public housing or Medicaid, they all have penalties, actually, if the couple does get married, because then the dad's father gets counted as income, and the welfare benefits go down, often by $15,000 or $20,000, not maybe $15,000 a year, depending on what the mom is getting. So we're sending a very strong signal, and for many low-income couples across the United States, we have made marriage financially irrational. And we shouldn't be surprised then that these dads don't stay in the home. Also, the dads are they're perfectly good guys. This is 40% of the U.S. population. These fathers generally make more than the mothers do. They are around at the time the child is born. Often the couple will say that they're interested in marriage, but basically they drift away, in part because the welfare system says, we're not interested in you. Let's have the mom married to that welfare check instead.
Well, that's exactly right. The state becomes the husband.
Exactly.
The government becomes the husband. So here's the thing. How do we change that? Because if we can incentivize the family again,
yes,
wouldn't that be the best thing for these? Because it's all about the children.
There are 2 ways to change it. The left would say, oh, you don't want to impose bourgeois conservative values on the poor. In fact, when surveys of poor women and very good books about this, often by liberal scholars, show that low-income women are, in fact, interested in marriage. They esteem it, but they fall into a pattern where they think they will have a child first and then get married later. That almost never works out. So we need to tell them that, look, if you don't want your children to be poor, if you don't want to be dependent on welfare for years and years and years, the best thing to do is form a strong relationship, get married, and then have a child, rather than having a child before that relationship is formed. The second thing we obviously have to do is reduce those penalties against marriage that are implicit in over 80 different welfare programs that go to the poor.
Yeah. It's time for a fundamental change. The problem is when you attempt a fundamental change and go to conservative roots, then you're accused of being anti-family, you're a racist, you're anti-family, you want to throw kids off a cliff. You know the nonsense you have to do, Robert.
There's no need to throw anybody off the cliff. All we have to do is have some common sense in welfare. Another thing that we should do in welfare is for any able-bodied adult, we should say, look, we'll give you assistance, whether it's food assistance or housing or cash, but we expect something back from you in return. This isn't going to be a one-way handout. We're going to expect you to work or prepare for work. Now, the fact of the matter is that 97% of the American public, including almost all Democratic voters, support that principle. That was the idea behind welfare reform 20 years ago. A lot of people think we actually do that, but in fact, the welfare state doesn't do that at all. It does exactly the opposite. So we should have a system that requires work, not kicking people off, but saying, if you need assistance, we'll give it to you, but we expect something back in return. And then in addition, hey, we're not going to aggressively penalize you if the dad marries the mom and works to stay in the home.
Yeah, we need to change these things. We need to change the dynamic because we need to incentivize the family in America because that's the foundation of what America really is. Robert Rector, Senior Research Fellow at the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society and Domestic Policy Studies. I appreciate your time, and we should talk again soon.
Thank you.
Robert, thank you very much. All right, it is Tuesday here on the Steve Gruber Show. This part of the program brought to you by Total Firearms. Total Firearms Gun Shop, the place to go for all things that you may need as far as firearms, accessories, and equipment. Also, training. I can't emphasize enough about the training you need at TotalFirearmsGunShop.com. If you're anywhere in the state, look it up. These are the guys that put on the gun shows all over the state of Michigan. Therefore, their selection is better, wider. If you're looking for something special, hard to find, or just the best price, TotalFirearmsGunShop.com, the place to go. It's the Steve Gruber Show on a Tuesday. I'll be right back.